Anthony DiComo covers the Mets, MLB.com, as the National League East. Anthony, seems to be the Nationals. Are the Mets the next in line? Is there a lot of optimism, or is there a lot of people who don't know if they'll win 90 or 70?
Yeah, well, they're the second most talented team in the division. I can tell you that confidently. I agree with Keith's Law 100%. I've actually said that quite a bit on in various places this spring. I don't think there's a team in baseball with a wider range of possible outcomes than the Mets, and that is because they are so talented, and also because they are just so injury prone. If the rotation stays healthy, or even really if the top two guys stay healthy, Noah Syndergaard and Jacob deGrom, the Mets are going to go places. They're going to be in the mix. If one of those guys gets hurt, if they have something similar to what happened last year when most of the rotation and most of the lineup went down, then they're not going to have a chance. The reality is probably somewhere in the middle. Now, is it 88 wins in the middle? Is it 82 wins in the middle? That could be the difference between making the playoffs and not. We will see over the course of the summer. But the one thing you cannot deny is that this is one of the more talented teams in the National League.
All right, now leaving Port St. Lucie, what is the deal with Harvey? How did he look? What's kind of the way that they're envisioning him? Is he going to be the guy behind deGrom and Syndergaard, somewhere lower than that, in the middle? I mean, he seems to be as a mystery as that team is.
Yeah, he's I guess a microcosm of the team itself, you could say. He looked okay in spring training. He was throwing 96 miles an hour, but he was also doing that last year when he was absolutely getting shelled down the stretch. For Harvey, it's going to be about health, but it's also going to be about command. Does he still have the ability after surgery, multiple surgeries now, all these things that he's gone through? Does he still have the ability to put the baseball where he wants to? When he first came up, that was the difference between him being kind of projected as maybe a mid to back end rotation starter and becoming what he ultimately became, which was for a couple of years an ace, one of the best pitchers in baseball. So if he has lost that ability to do that, to put the baseball where he wants to, it's going to be tough for him. Now, a guy who doesn't have the best command in the world but still throws 96, 97 is almost certain to be better than what Harvey was down the stretch last year. And the Mets would take that. The Mets would take a guy who puts up a 4 ERA and stays healthy the whole year and can kind of slot in that 3-4 spot in the rotation and be that guy. I don't think anyone expects him to be a Cy Young candidate, but if he can give them 150-plus effective innings, the Mets would be pretty happy with that.
Our NL East Week previews start with the Mets here. The Phillies hired Gabe Kapler. There was a lot of talk about Mickey Callaway early on. He ended up going to New York. So what's the vibe with the new manager after Collins the last couple of years? Very laid-back guy down there.
Yeah, and Callaway's, I guess laid back is not the word I would use to describe him, but he has that first-time manager vibe where he's got this agenda and these expectations. He wants everyone to fall in line. The interesting thing about him is that he is a pitcher. He was a major league pitcher. He was a pitching coach in Cleveland where he did a lot of good work with the staff that went to the World Series. So you don't see that very often in baseball. Obviously, Gabe Kapler was a hitter, and you look around at managers throughout the league, there aren't a lot of guys with pitching backgrounds. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out over the course of the summer. It was a very distinct decision that the Mets made, knowing that, like it or not, this roster is still built around pitching. How the Mets go is going to depend upon the pitching, what they get out of these very talented guys. Last year it wasn't much. You put together this dream rotation, some of the best pitchers in baseball. They wound up putting up a 5+ ERA and ranked 29th in the league. So if Mickey Callaway can play a role in turning that around, and they brought in a new pitching coach in Dave Island, the Mets are very happy with that. Beyond that, just looking more generally, I think, Terry Collins was here for 7-8 years. He did a very good job. I think people by and large were pleased, but it was time probably for a change. It was time for a culture change. It was time for just that era to end. And you bring in a fresh face, they bring in almost an entirely new coaching staff. You definitely feel a vibe change. Whether it winds up being better or worse, we shall see. But it is definitely different, and Mickey Callaway's pitching background is a big reason why.
NL East Week, looking at the Mets, Anthony DiComo, MLB.com. Frazier, local guy, and obviously his story with the Mets, it's kind of a cool story, but can Frazier still play? Looks like he's going to hit in the middle of that lineup.
I think if people temper their expectations for what Todd Frazier is, I think they'll be pleased with him. He's not going to hit for a very high average. The Mets hope that, it'll be more than he did last year. But, realistically, his ceiling is probably 240, 250 type guy. He is going to hit home runs. He has a chance to hit 30, maybe even more than that. He is going to play, decent defense at minimum. And if history is any guide, he's going to go out there. And frankly, this is the most important part for the Mets, considering what they've gone through at third base with David Wright in past years. They've tried Wilmer Flores over there. They've tried TJ Rivera and a whole bunch of names. They haven't had any stability. So the most important thing that Todd Frazier brings is he's averaged something like 154 games the last 5 seasons. He's going to be out there every single night. And as long as that continues to be the case, I don't think anyone doubts that he can at least put up that 25 to 30 home run range and be a productive hitter. He's not going to be an MVP candidate. He's not a good enough hitter to do that, but he has power, he has defense, he certainly has that durability, and that's kind of the package that the Mets wanted at third base.
Anthony, what can Mets fans expect out of a guy that's kind of long in the tooth in Jose Reyes, but has been a guy that, back in their glory days when they were winning, he was at the forefront?
Yeah, what's funny with Reyes is that he was brought back a couple of years ago, and last year, he kind of signed on to be a bench guy, to be a super sub, can fill in wherever type of guy, and he was okay with that role at that point in his career. He wound up leading the Mets in plate appearances because everyone else got hurt. Certainly the Mets do not hope that happens again, but they are confident that if they need to stick him in at shortstop, at second base, at third base. He even played the outfield a little bit last year, so they can do that. More than that, they have a very young, impressive starting shortstop in Ahmed Rosario, who's 22 years old. He's already become very good friends with Reyes. He considers Reyes a mentor. So that was a relationship that the Mets kind of wanted to continue kindling and keep going. And the Mets are very hopeful that, even if in his mid-30s now, Jose Reyes isn't that guy who's going to go out and steal a whole bunch of bases and win batting titles and that sort of thing. But if he can play every once in a while, be solid, and kind of set that clubhouse culture for a younger guy like Rosario, then that's pretty much what the Mets are looking for out of him.
A couple interesting guys still on this roster. Frazier won, Reyes, who as Deshaun mentioned, but Adrian Gonzalez, people forget he's on this team, and it looks like he might kind of platoon over there. I mean, this isn't the same Adrian Gonzalez that was an MVP candidate, right?
No, the Mets are just kind of searching and hoping they get something out of him. He's going to be 36 years old, which in today's game is an age where you don't really see many players even on the field, let alone be productive. Nelson Cruz put up an all-star caliber season last year at age 36, but he's pretty much it when you go around the league and look at what guys have done at that age. So the Mets are just kind of hoping to find a little magic, a little lightning in the bottle. They wanted to buy themselves a little time in case a top prospect of theirs, Dominic Smith, was not ready. Lo and behold, Dominic Smith is not ready. He missed almost all of camp with a quad injury. Didn't perform well down the stretch last year when he got his cup of coffee. So the Mets are just hoping they can get a couple of good months out of Gonzalez, frankly. And if they can't, they're paying him the major league minimum, a prorated portion of that. They won't hesitate to cut ties if they have to. But if you can get through May with him holding his own at first base, I think the Mets would be happy with that.
And then I guess Conforto is going to, he's not ready to start the season, but man, what an exciting player he is, and not to have him at the start of the season, but he's a guy that, when they add him, if they're hanging around, and to add a guy like him, he was great when he played last year.
Yeah, and they're not going to be without him for long. He came into spring training. He was their only all-star last year, and he came into spring training hoping that he could be back around May 1st, but he's kind of already passed almost every test there is. He's actually going to be eligible to come off the DL on April 5th, the start of the Mets' first road trip, and I'm not confident he'll be back just that day, but it might not be very far thereafter. He's not going to miss a lot of time at all, and once he does come back from this shoulder surgery, the Mets are hopeful he's not going to miss a beat. He is, like you said, one of the best young hitters in the league. He's got a good amount of power. He's got very nice plate discipline. He can hit for average. Defensively, he's been better in center field than I think anyone expected when the Mets made him a first-round draft pick a few years ago. So he's been all the things the Mets have wanted. They just have to get him, like so many of these guys,
right,
get him to stay on the field.
Anthony, Gabe Kapler has said with the Phillies he thinks the strength is really their bullpen. I mean, they went out and got Neshek, and they added Hunter, who's going to start on the DL, but they're a lot more younger power arms than they've had in the past. Would you say the Mets bullpen is a wild card, or do you think it's one of their strengths?
You know, it was definitely one of their weaknesses last year. And I think if you look around and you compare it to the rest of the league, I don't think the top ends or the back ends with Jurius Familia and A.J. Ramos, Anthony Swarzak, Jerry Blevins, those are kind of their top four guys. And I don't think those guys are necessarily as elite as some guys you might see, around the league, at least not at this stage of their careers. But they really supplemented it with some other guys, and they feel like they kind of run 10, 11 pitchers deep, and that's going to be their strategy this year. Is they're going to option guys up and down aggressively from Las Vegas. They're going to use the disabled list aggressively when guys get hurt. So, if somebody goes and they have to burn a reliever for 3 innings in a 10-inning game, then he's going to be down in the minors the next day, and they're going to call up a fresh arm. And they do feel that they go beyond 7 deep. They go 8, 9, 10 deep without really losing quality in that end. So while the top ends might not necessarily be there, the depth of the bullpen is. And I think it almost has to be better than what they put out there last year.
All right, the Mets, many people think, could be the second team in the National League East. Is this a playoff team, Anthony?
I think they're right on the bubble, and it's a cop-out answer. Gun to my head, I say yes. And last year, I should preface this by saying I said no. I really didn't believe in the Mets last year, and they proved me right. This year, I kind of do. And it's going to be tough because the Nationals are still very, very good. One of the best in the National League. The Phillies are obviously a lot better. The Braves still have a pretty young core, so it's really the Marlins are the only team in that division that you can still beat up on a little bit. It's not going to be as easy as it has been in past years for teams like the Nationals and the Mets at the top to just feed on the rest of the NL East. But talent-wise, the Mets are right there, like I said at the beginning, and I think the Phillies are probably 1 year away. So this is the year the Mets really need to make that charge. And yeah, I think they're going to be right in that wild card mix at the end of the season.
We're going to get any Tim Tebow sightings up there at Citi Field anytime soon?
You know what? It's not impossible. And he's starting in Double-A in Binghamton. So if y'all want to take a road trip, you can go see him pretty easily.
Did he? I mean, you see him down in Port St. Lucie. I mean, has he made strides?
You know what? You look at his spring training numbers; they were pretty awful. He was playing with a sprained. No, they were, but he was playing with a sprained ankle for most of spring. But it really actually is night and day how he looks between this year and when I first saw him last year. His stride is so much shorter. His swing is more compact, more fluid. He kind of looks like a baseball player now, whereas before he kind of looked like a football player trying to play baseball. It's a pretty stark difference to see, and Sandy Alderson, the GM here, kind of surprised everyone early in spring training and said, I think Tim Tebow will be a big leaguer. Well, that's the guy who has the power to make it happen, so frankly, I believe him. I'm not sure it'll happen this year, maybe if they're out of contention, but within the next 2 years, it wouldn't surprise me one bit to see Tim Tebow at Citi Field.
He'll start at Double-A. Anthony DiComo covers the Mets for MLB.com. The Mets open up the season like everybody else, except for the Reds, who already canceled their game tomorrow. And the Phillies will see the Mets next week up there at Citi Field. Anthony, thanks so much.
Thanks, Anthony.
You got it, guys. Anytime.